Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's Agile London. Thank you very much for joining us this week, and welcome back to most of you now. We've got a lot of repeat offenders joining Agile London, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So thank you very much for joining us again, and welcome to anyone that is new. So just a couple of reminders to most, but house rules to the new. If I could ask that throughout the session you do remain on mute. However, I think tonight's session will be slightly different, to which Steve Wells will educate us all on. The reason I ask you to stay on mute is due to the fluidity of the session. But as I say, I think this one's going to be slightly different. So I will ask Steve to give a bit more information on what he feels is the best way of working, because I know we're going to be doing some breakout rooms this session and really collaborating with one another. So Steve will give you a lot more information on that. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do as well is, if you have any questions that you would like me to ask Steve at the end about this session and about how it works, could you please privately message them to me in the chat, and I will sort of MC those and ask them to Steve at the end. He's also going to be bringing in, because he's collaborating this evening with Matthew Phillip, who is an organizational fitness coach. And Matthew will be giving us a bit of a debrief at the end on this session, and his sort of 10 pence worth, shall we say. So I'm going to now pass over to Steve Wells. So Steve Wells, as per his LinkedIn, is currently resting, but he's ex-Sky, M&S, GiffGaff and Clearbank. His session this evening is round the table, Agile Workshops, how do we do face-to-face in the new normal? Steve, I'm going to hand over to you now to introduce yourself. I will make you host so you can pick the session up, and over to you and take it from there.
Cool, thank you much. Cool. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. What we're going to show, what I've been thinking about during lockdown is how we can make these like remote sessions, this kind of thing, this session, a prime example. How do we get the engagement of these kind of sessions? Is there something we can do that's better than, say, a bit of Miro and these kind of things? What can we do? We started exploring ways that we can improve the engagement in sessions by having things to do on your own browser, as it were. So tonight we're going to do an example of that, and we've got Matt Phillip on the call, I said, and Matt invented this amazing board game called No Estimates, which is all about how you can explore variations in how you estimate for projects. And we're going to play the game online to show you an example of how this kind of online gaming can work in the Agile space. So I shall start off with a quick few slides, okay? And I will rush this thing to start. When we do these things properly, it will be a lot more controlled than this, but we want to rush it in so it give you kind of maximum game time. So I'm going to start here. Okay. Present. So there then. Okay. So No Estimates game. So what it is, it's a board game that looks pretty much like this, and you basically, it's just a Kanban board, and you have a set of tasks to get through, and each task got sets of efforts, and it's a simulation of a project in play. So things get blocked, and things are urgent, and things have dependencies on other teams, and so on. And we're going to play in a number of teams tonight. I think we're probably going to do 6 teams tonight, but you play it in a team, and you play it by basically playing the board game on your own browser as if you're kind of around a table. So this is what work cards look like. Each card's got a set of effort, amount of effort on each card that's defined that you have to go through. So this is obviously even better than real life, because in real life you don't know, but we're going to tell you now exactly how much work there is to do and exactly what effort it is. So you should be able to do a very accurate estimate, hopefully. So at the start of this game, you'll do a very accurate estimate, and then we'll see how close you are as we get further on. As you can see, those little circles there, effectively, you're just going to click on those little circles to play your effort on the cards. Some cards are urgent and some depend on another team. So every person in your team has 4 points of effort per day, and you can spend that effort by clicking on these circles on the cards. You each have a speciality. So like, say you're a designer, then if you're a designer, then one of your effort points is 1 design point. But if you're something else, so if you're a tester, then you have to spend 2 effort points to do 1 design point. It should become fairly clear once we start playing. But as I'm rushing this a little bit so we get maximum playing time. But okay. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and I'll just share something else here. So we'll just, how do I stop sharing this one? Share. Okay. Bear with me a second, and I'll show you kind of the game in action, as it were. Why is this not exiting the share? Sorry. Okay, this is what the game looks like, and I'm going to give the instructions to how you're going to play. So you're going to go into a set of breakout rooms, okay? And make a note of when you enter that breakout room, it's going to have a color, and that's the team that you need to join when you get into the breakout room. So I'll post the URL into the chat in a moment, and when you go in, you click on the setup. The game will be already defined for you. Enter in your name. So here you go, like this. You just type in Steve, and then pick the team that's the name of your breakout room. Okay, fairly straightforward. Hope everybody's got that. Okay, and then once you've done that, you're going to click on this, set estimates, and there's some instructions there that tells you what I've just told you about how much work there is to do and so on. And you need to set an estimate for the total project in this field here. So ignore those numbers, those are for different kind of games, but you need to state, given that you've got how many people you have, how many cards there are, and how much effort there is per card, then do an estimate of how long you think the project's going to take. And then you play the game. So basically you click on the cards here, which puts the cards into your Kanban, and you click on the things to make the effort. And when things are complete, they move on to the next column and so on. And the objective is to get everything into done. And if you look at the top here, you'll see how much effort people have got to play with. And when all these are 0 for everybody in the team, then you click next to move on to the next day. And there'll be some instruction or some nugget of news or something, and that's it. So hopefully you should pick it up fairly quickly. So what I'm going to do is just drop you into breakout rooms and leave you to it. So here's the URL. I should put this. Anybody got any questions so far? They want to. It should be straightforward with a bit of luck. Okay. Okay, so I've just posted the URL that you need to go to. So you play this game on your own browser. So you go to this URL. I'm going to put you in Teams shortly, and there we go. Anybody got any pressing questions at the moment? This should give us about half an hour of playing time, which should be enough to do some decent stuff. Yeah. Are we ready? Are we ready to go for it? Absolutely. I can see some people are super excited. Fantastic. Right, we're going into breakout rooms. So don't forget, the name of your breakout room is the name of your team. So here we go. Breakout rooms. Hang about. Open all rooms. Just the same options. Okay, you should go into rooms. Let's have a look. Hang about. That didn't quite work. Never mind. I shall do this. Okay, you're getting your rooms too. It's not quite working as I thought it was going to, but here we go. Right.
While Steve prepares our rooms, does anyone have any questions about how to get started or how this will work? So I see Mike's question about not having a mic or video. Once you get into your team space, you'll want to be able to communicate with your teammates. So I guess you could use the chat functionality as you've done here. So probably shouldn't. It might slow things down a little bit, but maybe it'll simulate being on a remote team where you don't have comms.
You can still chat. I mean, you can go off mute when you're in your team, I think. You'll be fine. Right, I think everybody's Right, everybody should now be in Teams. Okay. Okay. Right.
That's pretty good. It's recording still. It's funny. So for the records, I know there's nobody here, but just for the records, because it's a recording. I've been in breakout room number, I don't actually know the number, the blue one, and we couldn't figure out the board. We set in the name, we picked up blue, hit enter, and then there was a blank board. So I'm not quite sure what to do actually. So I exit the breakout room to ask for advice because we couldn't figure it out. We refresh the browser, we click all the different buttons on the browser. There is setup, set estimates, set rules, and game, but the entire space of the window is white. So I guess gonna leave this meeting. Oh, join breakout room, maybe we can go there.
So welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a bit of fun. As I say, it's very, very rushed. It's just really just to give you like a feel for the game and the concept of playing on your own browser. So hopefully you had a bit of fun and maybe learn something. So Alex, if you're there, do you want to pass it over to Matt, and then Matt can do a bit of a debrief on that, and then we can take some questions.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, just before I do pass over to Matthew, get your questions privately sent over to me in the chat if you have any, and I will ask them to Steve and or Matthew at the end. So I will now, yes, pass you over to Matthew Phillip, who is an organisational fitness coach, and I believe he's going to give some feedback and a bit of a debrief on the session we've just been all involved with, or that I just observed. Over to you, Matt.
All right, thank you very much. So how was that for everybody? You can unmute yourself, and Femi was one of my teammates, so did a great job. We had some struggles with our deployment. Our deployment process was not quite up to snuff, but we at least got one finished.
I'm not sure we got one finished. We were struggling a bit at the end. It was hard just to get it over the line finally.
Mm-hmm.
We have done exactly the anti-Kanban, and the textbook anti-Kanban was wonderful. Zero flow, everyone without a strategy on one ticket was beautiful. And we moved the whole column from one to the next.
Anti-Kanban, I love it.
But I'd just like to say, actually that demonstrates one of the biggest problems you've got, an agile problem, is the fact that you've got a designer that's 4 points for their effort, but 2 points for something else. Well, it's disproportionate, therefore, in terms of effort versus design versus development. So therefore, the designer is going to get through their tickets quicker than the developers are. So that is going to, by the nature of the balance of the team and the effort, that was going to happen, whatever we did.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to make our people more T-shaped.
So I assume all the teams came up with an initial estimate. Can someone explain how you came to your initial estimate? What were your estimates, by the way? Maybe the team captains can just shout out.
So I just did the mathematical 105 based on the number of days versus the effort.
Right. Okay.
And no clarity, because at the time we didn't see exactly how many weeks effort each of the stories were. So it's only one that actually it said on average. So
sure.
when you actually started going into it, you go, hang on a minute. When you said average, what you really were doing, an average of design effort versus development effort, and development effort was clearly a half as much a gain versus design effort. So it's a classic example where the information, the average, was giving a misleading set of information.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. So he's reporting the smallest estimate was 27. The largest was 525. Okay, great. So I'm guessing someone didn't do the division part of that 525, but so we had a range. It sounds like 27 and maybe
44.
24.
No, 44.
Oh, 44. Okay. All right. Others?
No, we said 200.
200. Okay. Okay, great. So 27, 44, and 200. You all know that you had the exact same project to estimate, right? And we gave you the exact effort up front, right? You knew this, right? So this is kind of strange that we had such a wide range of estimates. We gave you everything you needed to know, and yet I would have at least expected the estimates to be the same. Whether you actually met them is the second question. But before we even started, our estimates were way far ranging. So that's interesting. I'm going to point that out first. So it sounds like when you estimated how long it would take in days, you used the effort that we gave you, the average per card, number of cards, number of people per team, divide by 4, you come to some number. Why did you use effort as a way to answer the question when something would be done? What was the assumption you made there? as opposed to the number of birds
cards.
outside your window,
Yeah.
or
well, because that's what you do, isn't it? We
That's
know
what you
that's
do.
what we're required to do. That's the wrong thing to do, but it's what everybody does. We know that.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's an implicit assumption when we use effort in some way, whether you're using points or whatever it is. By the way, I noticed no one used points, but that's a second question. There's an assumption implicit in our estimating that there's a relationship, a strong relationship between the essential complexity or the effort involved in something and how long it takes. And so it's interesting, if we'd played this game a bit longer, we would actually be able to see if there's a mathematical correlation in that assumption. I'll tell you that in real life and in this game, there is a very low correlation. And so why might that be? I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation for us here, and we can kind of keep things moving. Why doesn't it not work out that that effort, even given the perfect effort estimate, it wasn't even an estimate, would actually not yield the right timing?
Because estimates don't account for wait time. Generally.
Okay, that's a great, yes, right, exactly. So let me actually kind of just fast forward here. We will go quickly through this.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to Tom's point, when we estimate, we typically maybe estimate code, time it takes to code. Mm. We might, if we're really good, we might estimate the whole end-to-end process. But what really happens is as Tom said, there's significant wait periods and rework and all sorts of things that happen. What all happened in our game? So obviously, the amount of time it takes to actually do the work. But what else happened? What else did you experience in this game? Impacts to how long it took to deliver stuff.
Oh, the deploy kept failing.
Okay, deploy kept failing, right? And what's a fancy term for that in real life when things fail and we have to do them over?
Refactoring, defects.
Yeah, it's a rework. Yeah. So when we estimate something straight away, we don't even consider that there's the possibility of rework, right? Because we as humans suffer from optimism bias. We think in our mind's eye of everything going well. So that's one kind of bias we need to be aware of. What else happened?
Started seeing blockers.
Blockers happened, right? Okay, good. So blockers happen. We don't usually foresee them. They do typically follow a pattern, which you can use a technique called blocker clustering to analyze. But right, so we have blockers, we have rework, we have blockers. What else happened?
Dependencies.
Dependencies on other teams, right?
Yeah, integration issues.
Integration issues. Okay, good.
Just waiting for people. Starvation and alternate starvation and overload. But,
yeah, exactly. Right. So we think about flow and overload, things arriving too late, too early to a process.
Or
good.
Skill level, just the skill level.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Okay. Someone already mentioned the team composition, I think, right? Depending on who's doing what roles. Good. Did anyone finish a round or a day with at least one bit of effort left? Or did everybody completely use all of your effort?
No, we had a couple of days in which there was just one unit and we could not utilize it.
Okay. Why couldn't you utilize it?
Because the task was not matching with the skill set. So at least 2 units had to be there.
Okay. So you could have actually made everybody be busy, right? Because you could have actually pulled in a lot of cards, right? You could have had maybe like 3 cards in each column.
Yeah, that's what we realized afterwards.
So why didn't you do that? You evil, wicked man! You didn't pull in multiple cards per column. Why didn't you do that?
In any agile company, there's a ping pong table, because you have a bit of capacity to use that.
To be fair, it wasn't obvious how you brought new cards onto the board. I didn't discover that until about 2 or 3 rounds in.
Oh, okay, all right. So unintentional limiting work in progress.
No, I think there were a few. We were, while using the user interface, there were a few things that weren't straight away intuitive to us. So there was so I think part is our learning how to use this simulation as well. Okay,
Sure.
so you've got to take that into account.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. Yeah. So, well, speaking of pulling cards in, how each team, maybe captains, how many cards did you have on your board at any given time?
To begin with, we had about 3, but then when I discovered there was this button on the left that we could get more in, I tapped it a few times. We had more.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I know the team I was in, we had 1 pretty much the whole game, but sounds like you had 3 or so after you learned how to start work.
Yep, yeah, and we did manage to get 1 into the done column, which was quite pleasing.
Right. Other teams, how many cards did you have in progress?
Well, orange team, we stuck to pretty much 1 throughout. And we got quite a few into the done column by doing that.
All right. And how many people did you have on your team?
3.
3.
Yeah.
And you only had 1 thing working in progress. What if I'm a manager and I came by to look at your work tables and I saw 3 people and you're only working on 1 thing? Well, what would I expect? What would I say?
Well, you'd probably think we were underutilized.
Right. So that's good. So utilization is another factor, right? You made intentional choices in how you utilized people and how much work you had going on, right? And you intuitively, it sounds like most teams intuitively understood that the fewer things in progress you have, the faster things can be finished, more predictably get finished as well. So good. So did anyone work outside your specialty? Or did you always work in your...
Yeah, all the time, because the design effort was...
We had to because there was no deployer. I mean, nobody in the deployment.
Okay, right. You had to. Right. And so again, this game makes it easier to see that you're focusing on flow, but collaboration policy is another big impact on how long things take to be delivered, as well as work in progress. Did anyone figure out that you experienced the urgent card? Did you have an urgent card?
Yeah, we got an urgent.
Yes, we had. Yes.
What happened when you got the urgent card with respect to the other cards?
We concentrated on the urgent one.
Correct. I mean, we were not having the background since it was marked as urgent. We shifted our focus to the urgent card.
Right, as we do in real life. So selection policy and processing policy is another thing. Anytime we expedite something or allow one thing to be prioritized over the other stuff that's already in progress, we incur flow debt, right? And that's just not something we can foresee when we estimate things. So there's all these things, not just essential complexity or effort, but all those things impact how long it takes. And so that's why it's hard for us when we're working in a complex environment to foresee all these things. And so we want to think, well, so here's what happens. So basically the idea that we have so many things impacting how long it takes, and yet only a little bit of time is actually spent doing essential work. And that's, if you're familiar with the idea of flow efficiency, right? So most teams in knowledge work have relatively low flow efficiency, and a lot of people have placed the number at somewhere between 5 and 15%. And so the reality is, when we come to estimating, even if we nailed the estimates, right? And so even if someone like Steve gave you all the perfect effort involved in each card up front, you would still not be able to get anywhere close to the actual time it takes to estimate how long it takes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So we just have to remember that. That's just the reality that we're working in. It's not any fault of our own necessarily. It's just that there's many more factors, many more sources of variation that impact how long things take to be done. And going back to that question about just how much correlation do we have between our upfront estimate of how long things take and actually how long they take. This is from a book called Real World Kanban by Matthias Skarin. He did the research. I do my ongoing research with teams that I work with. And it's almost universally true that there's very low correlation, especially when you look at the end-to-end flow times of work, the upfront guess how long it takes to do something and how long it actually takes. There's a very low relationship. And again, if we play this game a bit longer, Steve has it built into the game where you can actually see the correlation between how long things are taking. So something that has an estimate of 31, because we prioritized it as an urgent, it might actually just take a day or two. Go ahead, yeah.
Sorry, you saying lead time or cycle time? I know there's sometimes a bit of a definition difference, but cycle time as in from starting the story to ending the story.
Yeah, so I try to avoid all the argument. I just call it delivery time, from when you commit to something to when it's delivered. So, if that helps.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, good. In Matthias, in this example, he's using lead time the whole time to process something.
Yeah, it's cool. Just a definition.
Yep, great. This is a fun tool that Troy McGinnis has on his site. Basically, depending on what your correlation is, you can see that the estimate will have very, very low predictive value in terms of when things happen. So you can see here things that are estimated in a 0.2% correlation. You might as well not be estimating, because you're going to get some things that you estimate as a 1 that take just as long as it takes something to be an 8 and a 13. So that's a fun little tool you can play with.
And if you think about it, that 0.2%, that 0.2 is actually about the normal flow efficiency for most people's organization.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, yeah. So,
and now the correlation is a bit different from flow efficiency, but they're very similar.
Yeah, but if your flow efficiency is 20%, that means you can double the time it takes for you to actually work on a piece of work, and you've actually only increased the overall duration of the piece of work by a very small amount.
Yep. Yeah. So you can play with it. Again, the idea here is to use data to inform your decisions about how good you are at estimating, and if there's other options for estimating. We're all aware of our biases. Well, maybe not, I don't know. There's certainly a number of them that go into estimating when someone asks you to estimate work. It's interesting, even in our game, you'll notice that there's a little calendar bar at the top of the screen that has numbers from, what was it? Let's see if I can get there. Yeah, here. On the day tracker here, 1 to 30. We've had people who estimate within 30 days because they're anchored on the idea that surely it must be completed in 30 days, right? So there's an anchoring effect. We find that, someone says to us, "Hey, can you estimate this project? We've told the client that it'll take 6 months, but I want to get your opinion on it too," right? So there's an anchoring effect. There's lots of different biases that go into it. Really quickly touched on the idea of complexity. This is Cynefin. If you're not familiar with it, it really informs our thinking about where we are in terms of the work we're doing. And so the idea is that for the most part, we're working in the complex, where we've not done this before. It's almost by definition, knowledge work is new to us. It's not like building a car, where we're building a car just as we built the same car yesterday as we did a week ago. Physical manufacturing is mostly in the complicated space. Knowledge work, intangible goods are going to be in the complex space. So we just need a different way of approaching that. So the idea is that when someone asks us for an estimate, we typically do things that we've inherited from a complicated world of thinking about things. We need things like reference class forecasting and Monte Carlo simulation, which I'll do for us in a minute. Okay. I'll just quickly go through this. I don't know how much time we have for the debrief, or maybe I can pause here and we can ask.
Matthew, can I jump in there?
Please,
very quickly. So just a couple of things. Yeah, got a few more minutes before the session will start to wrap up. A question's come in for you though, and it feels good to jump in while you're on estimation. So a question's come in, and it is, without effort estimation, how do you do release planning?
Right. Great question. So I see a thumbs up there. So so it depends. It depends on what question we're trying to answer. One is usually how many things can we get done in a period of time. Or the other question is how long will it take us to get a certain amount of things completed, right? And so depending on what the answer is, if we're making decisions that require us to know that, like, are we going to invest in this project or not? Or how much do we need to how big of a team do we need, right? Depending on if we have data already, we'll use data to answer that question. And so maybe I'll just go ahead and switch over now, and we can look at, here, let me grab a different window. We can talk about the idea of probabilistic forecasting. So if you'll bear with me just a minute. I'm going to stop my share for a second and try to get okay. Okay, so there's generally two scenarios. One is given a scenario that we have data that we've been working. So pretend it's not your very first iteration plan or sprint or release planning session. You have some data involved. So let me go ahead and share again. So the idea is we want to think probabilistically. And here we go. Actually, before I do this, I do want to give some background to probabilistic thinking. So the idea is that thinking probabilistically means that there's a range of possible outcomes in the future. So there's not just a deterministic thing where we plug in some numbers and it outputs an exact number of when things are going to be done. It's kind of like the weather. There's a percentage chance of, maybe if you're in England, rain falling, right? You might have a 50% chance of getting an inch of rain. You might have a 25% chance of getting more than an inch of rain. You might have 25% chance of no rain happening. I don't know if that's ever the case in England, but by the way, I'm a big fan of English weather. A lot of people complain about the weather. I actually enjoy English weather. So think about it that way. Think about there's multiple possible outcomes. A story, a release, you might be able to do 10 things. You might be able to do 20 things. And there's a percentage possible outcome of each of those things. And so that's why we need to think probabilistically. So lesson 1 for today is the next time someone asks you for an estimate, give them a range, not a single number, okay? You all gave a single number, partly because that's how we designed the game. But really, the future is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. And so give a range, okay? So if we think about this, it's easy to think about this in terms of dice. And I promise I'll get to your question in a minute about how do we answer this. Given 2 6-sided dice, you don't know the outcome, right? It's uncertain, but it's not unpredictable. Can someone tell me something about the probability of getting certain numbers, a certain total with these 2 dice?
Really good chance it will be 7.
A really good chance it'll be 7. Tom, are you a gambler or are you just guessing?
Gamer.
And can you tell us why 7 is a really good chance?
Because there's the 2 dice. There's the number of combinations that are up to 7 is higher than any other combination.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. We got some other gamers or gamblers. Okay, good. Do you happen to know what the actual percentage is? Any of you? You said it's higher than others, but
can't remember.
It's in the middle of the bell curve, but I can't remember which it is.
Yeah, right. It's a bell curve of distribution, right? Yeah. So, what's the chance of us getting a 0 or a 1 total?
0.
0. What's the chance of us getting a 13?
0.
Right. So we already, even though we don't know the exact outcome here, we have some probability approaches here, right? And so, right, this is the actual distribution. It is a bell curve. It is normally distributed like this, which, by the way, is not how our real work happens. And that's an important thing to remember because we can't use averages then. A lot of people will use averages like, velocity is an average. Don't use average. That's lesson number 2, because our work is not normally distributed. So averages are not going to work for us. Okay, right. So there's different outcomes at different numbers here, right? 17% chance we get a 7. There's other outcomes that are possible, just like in our work when we think about how long it'll take us or how many things we can get done in a certain period of time, right? So let me go ahead and show you what it looks like to do a distribution of possible outcomes in the future. So, for example, if we've been doing work, right? So maybe this is our work over the last couple of weeks. So pretend these are individual work stories or work items. Some of these things are taking, so this one took 7 days to complete. This thing took 8 days. A couple of things took 7. This thing took 12. This thing took 18 days, and so on. Right, that's the distribution of our work, how long it's taking, right? And we might even actually look at a histogram, right? So I mentioned that our work is not normally distributed, right? This is not a bell curve, right? There's a lot of things take only 2 days, and then there's a bunch of stuff that takes any number of days. That's how real work happens. So we need a way to understand probabilistically how long it would take. So whoever asked the question about PI plan, or not PI planning, release planning. What's the question you're trying to answer in release planning?
When will we have got all of the things you want to get done? No, how many things will we have got? Depends what your constraint is.
Yes, right.
Is it time or is it an amount of work?
Okay.
So if it's time, if there's a cadence, then you say how much work can we get in the time available.
Okay.
And if it's work, it's when will all the work we need to get done get done.
Okay, great. So let's take the first one. So how many things can we get done in a period of time? So maybe we're planning for a quarter. So that's 90 days, right? So so this is saying 30 days. Let's go ahead and change to be what's 90 days from today? October 30th, November 30th. Oh, it's kind of the end of the year, isn't it? Yeah. Right. So if we were to ask the question, how much stuff can we get done by the end of the year? Right, that's 90 days, 91 days. Okay, so again, probabilistically, we're wondering, based on our actual, how long it's taken us to complete work in the past, how long it'll take us. So this is giving us a sense that 95% confidence says that we can get at least 208 things done. All right, so if you think back to the game, so those of you, all the teams who finished at least one item, how long did it take you to finish one item? How many days? What day was it when you finished the first card?
The third sprint or third day?
3 was it, I think.
3 or 5?
3.
Yeah.
3.
All right. So, and then anyone finish 2 cards or more? Maybe some team. So the idea here is that based on sometimes our work takes 1 day to complete, sometimes it takes 10 days. What's the mix of work or the possible scenario that if we were to do, if we were to pull out a bunch of cards over 90 days, how long would it take to do all those things, right? And so this is giving us a probabilistic understanding of when we would be done, or how many things we would be done with. So you don't even have to worry about the work, assuming a few things. Assuming that we're breaking up the work in a similar way as we've done in the past, our team size is about the same. We're working with the same amount of work in progress. Our tech stack is the same. Some of these assumptions being in place, you can make a forecast that says, without estimating the work, you can actually say, with reasonable confidence, again, depending on what level of confidence your stakeholders desire, 95th percentile for the more conservative planners, maybe 50th percentile for those who are really wanting to see what's possible. I'll pause there. Any questions? Have I gone too fast? Is there something I've missed that maybe would?
I think the thing about when release planning is that release planning is a probabilistic exercise, whether you recognize that or not.
Right.
So you can say, how do you do release planning? Well, we work it all out, then we say we're going to hit that date, but you still only got a percentage chance of hitting it, which is why actually doing releases is so painful for most people, because most people over commit the planning fallacy and say we're going to do something that actually only going to got 50-50 chance of doing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. Okay, go ahead.
So, but partly, I mean, partly it's a moot point though, because the idea with Agile is the fact that you continue deployment. So ideally you want to get to a point where you're doing automated deployment as and when the stories are complete. So therefore planning for a release in the kind of traditional way becomes a moot point, surely. That's where you want to get to. So automated, because then you don't have the pain of knowing exactly when, because you won't anyway, not accurately, as we've just described. I know that's nirvana, but that's what everybody's aspiring to with automating the process.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in for a second, Matthew? Because I've got quite a cool story about this. So it's a competitor of yours. Never mind. They were working on a big government program, and they used Actionable Agile to track their work. They regularly did releases. They're working in Scrum, so they still only release once a fortnight. But you could use Actionable Agile in that model, and they got so confident of their forecasts of delivery that they integrated their forecast delivery rate into their contract and their payment model for it, which was awesome to watch, and it worked really well.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's a great example of using data to gain an advantage, right? Because now they've gotten some level. Every system is predictable in some degree, right? And you can see here, it's really the breadth of data points, right? The kind of this idea of the scatter plot. And so every system is predictable. It's just to what extent is it predictable, right? And so that's a great example. I love that. Competitor or not, Tom? Yeah, that's great. No, I mean, this is the idea. We want to help each other improve our industry and how we work. So, so that's great. Let me go ahead and quickly show the other side of the coin. So the first question was, how many things can get done in a certain period of time? The question is, when will we be done by a certain set of scope or certain batch of things? So take, for example, 100 items, just randomly. And again, this is using probabilistic thinking to say, well, depending on how conservative we want, maybe we absolutely need to know, maybe it's a fixed deadline or a deadline-driven concern. Maybe we're trying to comply with government regulation or some kind of a event in maybe it's a retail event, right? In which case we might plan at some different interval. But this is telling us, again, given 100 items we need to work on, how long will that take us? And so this is saying, it's nice, it puts it on a calendar view. We have a 95% chance of it finishing by November 17th. And so that gives us a sense of how we plan and answer the question for our stakeholders when things will be done. But back to, I want to explore, is it Jeanette?
Yeah,
your point about, we want to reduce all these sources of variation. So we invest in things like automated deployments. Maybe some of you in the game got to that point. Because there's all these sources of variation that we mentioned. In order to be more predictable, we need to be able to reduce those things. And so takeaway number 3, or maybe number 4, I forget what we're on, is rather than getting better at estimating, which we can only get so much better at, right? Analysis is only going to serve us so much. So, right. So if you're maybe like a football fan, I wore my sky blue for Manchester City today, by the way. You can get all the football analysts together and ask them, how are City going to do this year? Right? They can spend hours and hours, just like we do in a room, estimating, and there's going to be a diminishing return on that investment of analysis, because we're not working in the complicated, we're working in the complex. And so analysis is not going to serve us. In fact, analysis actually is going to lead us away from the right answer a lot of times. And so we want to really understand how our system is working. So not getting better at estimating, that's kind of a fool's errand. Really getting better at reducing sources of variation in our system. So when we see something like this, there's a lot of risk in this tail here, right? There's things that are taking 13 to 30 days to finish. Why are those things happening? We want to reduce those sources of variation. It's interesting. Is anybody noticing any sort of trend or anything interesting about this particular system in terms of the distribution? It's certainly not a normally distributed system. Anyone? There's a bunch of things taking 2 days or less.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the things that have you got any more information about what it is it's taking a bit more information?
We don't. Can you make a guess? Hypothesis?
Smaller items are more predictable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe items are too big and not been broken down enough.
Okay, that's possible. Yeah, good guesses. It's possible, and you see this bimodal kind of distribution, or you've got one thing, and then you've got like this kind of log normal distribution. A lot of times it's because there's two different classes of service happening, right? There's an expedite. I need this now, or some stakeholder, or the hippo in the highest paid person in the organization is saying we need this thing done, and that gets special treatment, right? So those things end up finishing in 2 days, whereas everything else languishes and incurs flow debt, right? So it's kind of like you think about queuing and at the airport, when that used to be happening. There's people who go through on the fast lane, and then everybody else has to wait. They incur extra waiting time when those people get expedited. So we're not sure what's happening here, but when I see a bimodal distribution or something like this, it usually shows forth that there's either explicit or implicit two classes of service.
Can I just ask, on the dot plot at the bottom?
Yes.
Towards the right hand side, the dots are getting higher. So there aren't any down at the bottom like they used. So if you go along, there's a lot of dots quite near the,
Right.
Are some of them just not showing anymore, or is that?
Right. So at the bottom, so we have two different graphs here. One, the bottom is a full view of over time, a scatter plot, and then on top here is the histogram. So it's just displaying the same data differently.
It looks like performance is getting worse towards the right, or maybe it's just clustering in the middle.
Yeah,
maybe it's more predictable and higher. Okay.
Yeah, let's actually go to the scatter plot here, on top and bottom. So you can see, some of these items back in here, we're taking, there's some, we might call them outliers, 38 days, etc. The thing that's nice about using percentiles is that, as opposed to averages, is that outliers aren't going to throw us off too much. So you've all heard the joke about when Bill Gates walks into the pub, on average, everybody's a millionaire. Right. So if we're using averages, or even like standard deviations, that kind of thing, because our data is not normally distributed, that's a fallacy. And so, whereas if say this data point here, it's on the 99th percentile, it says it took 31 days. It could have taken 100 days, and it wouldn't have thrown off our 95th, 85th, 70th, and 50th percentile planning intervals.
So another thing I've seen, which would give that kind of graph, would be where a resource is available can work permanently on the project, and then other resources are not, and they're distracted by the things. So they're working much slower cadence than the others. So you get something which are done really quick, and then the others just languish and take forever.
Yes.
Availability.
Yep, exactly. That's another technique, or another problem that we need to look at improving flow for, and predictability. Yep,
my guess would be that there are complicated and complex systems going, and they're cracking through the complicated stuff easier. It's more predictable, and then the complex stories or projects where they just need longer.
Yeah.
I think you have these two buckets.
You also might just, brutally, and this has happened to me, you might have some of the stories need a sign off by somebody who only turns up once a fortnight.
Yeah.
Right.
They just got some massive weight and queue in there that none of the others do.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you do want to look at a full end-to-end system when you're doing these kind of analyses and diagnostics. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing with infrastructure. So when you need certain things that need to be done with infrastructure and sign-offs and release dates and things before you can get to a point where you've got you can move things forward. So infrastructure parts of project have been really bad for that in the past, I've seen.
Yes. Really quickly, I mentioned the scenario in which we have data. The scenarios in which we don't have data, when will a project be finished? I actually just was working with a client recently about this very question. So what we can do is something called reference class forecasting. So the idea, it's kind of, if you think about maybe the analogy of home sales, home buying, right? So you've got it. My cat would like to say hello to everyone. You've got a situation where you don't know what a particular home or house is going to sell for. So you look at comparables, right? And so in this case, I had them provide me all the projects that they ever worked on in the last 8 years. And because they did have that data, they had finishing, when it was started, when it finished. And from that, did a distribution or a scatter plot rather of how long they might expect a next project to take. So their question is, we're investing in this new initiative. How long will it take to be finished? They had no idea. They did from the kind of the inside out. They're like, well, it's got so many features. Do we need to start estimating stories? And again, as we saw, there's so much variation, so many sources of variation involved in that estimating the essential complexity of something to be done is not going to give us a very good answer. And so instead, we're looking at the distribution of their projects. And so I said, based on this, depending on how confident you want to be with your stakeholders, you might choose like the 85th percentile and to say, you have an 85% chance of the work finishing in 688 days. Like, what was that, 2 years? This was not a very satisfactory answer to them because they'd estimated it like a year. Right, but it's kind of like if I'm building a house for you or building anything for you, and you said, how long is it going to take you? And I said, it'll take me a year. And you look at my portfolio of projects, and I've never taken only a year to finish a house for someone. The data, the expression, the data don't care about your feelings, right? Facts don't care about your feelings. This is what's actually happening in our system. So this is how you would answer the question, when will a particular project or thing be done if you don't have the data for that particular project. Okay, I'll stop there. I've been talking a lot. Maybe any questions, Steve, anything I've missed or anything else you all want to talk about today?
I think that's pretty good. So it's obviously we're very interested in people's feedback on kind of how the game works, because obviously this is normally a around the table in-person kind of thing, and we've built it to be played remotely. So it'd be very interesting if you thought the game kind of worked, if it was engaging. What were your thoughts? Did it feel like you were in a room together? That's where we want to get to. So yeah, hopefully that part of the technology is obviously is kind of my side of it, and the no estimate stuff is Matt's, and I think hopefully it was useful and enjoyable. And thank you all for playing. Great, cheers.
It was great, thank you.
Good.
Steve, Matthew, thank you very much for this evening. Certainly in these times, it certainly scratches that itch to sort of come together, and I totally agree. Just want to say thank you very much for getting involved tonight and facilitating that session. Matthew, thank you very much to yourself as well for your contribution. This is recorded and will go onto Oliver Bernard's YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that if you want to refer back. And also, we are back next week, but we're not back on Wednesday, we're back on Tuesday, because next week is Agile London Super 6, where it's 6 speakers speaking for 60 minutes at 6 p.m. on the 6th of the month. I can all see you absolutely loving what I've done there. So we've got 6 speakers. They have 10 minutes each. It's a rapid fire session. I'd really love to see you all on that one as well. And this week, to let you into a Agile London secret, I've managed to secure Joe Justice for a talk. So he is speaking on remote Agile London in early November. So keep an eye out for that one. And my little tip to the 19 of you that are left in the session now, join that one early because we may have a limit on Zoom. So make sure you jump on that one to hear from Joe. Steve, Matthew, thank you once again for your talks and your session this evening. Thank you to everyone for joining, and I wish you all a lovely evening. See you later.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.